For section 2, we're going to move into republics, and we need to go back and we need to review some stuff that we looked at when we were going over the anti-federalist and federalist argument. And that is the idea of classical conservatism and classical liberalism. Remember that classical conservatism is the support for a monarchy. So during the whole revolutionary period that started with the American Revolution, extended through the Haitian Revolution, into the French Revolution and the revolutions of 1848 in Europe, you're looking at a group of people who fought to keep the monarchs in power. And those were the classical conservatives. They did not want to see a change from the way things were. Classical liberals were the people who wanted to see a movement to more democratic forms. Republicanism in the U.S., whatever it is that Toussaint Louverture set up in Haiti, the misery that came on with the French Revolution, they just didn't quite get that one right. And then the movement towards Republican or Democratic forms throughout the 19th and 20th centuries in most of Europe. Now, that's very different from the way that we view the words conservative and liberal nowadays. So a conservative nowadays, remember, is somebody who is more in favor of the status quo. And it doesn't mean that they're in favor of a monarch. It means that they're in favor of keeping things the way that they are now and making incremental changes or marginal changes to things that might need some reforming. A modern liberal is much more in favor of grand overhauls of things. So an example would be the healthcare system or the health insurance market. They did not like the health insurance market, so they wanted to see Obamacare and eventually after Obamacare move to a single payer system. So you're moving from a private system to a very, very public system where the government is the only entity that is paying for health insurance. That would be considered a very, very liberal sort of thing to do. One of the things that you're going to see nowadays is that rather than being called liberals, liberals prefer to be called progressives, or at least the ones who are further to the left prefer to be called progressives. And again, they chose progressive because of the progressive movement of the early 20th century, but also because the term who would want to be against progress. So that's why that term got chosen. So a republic is a representative democracy. Remember that in a representative democracy, we do not take direct votes from the population to make decisions. That would be a direct democracy. What we do instead is we elect people who are going to represent us, and those representatives then go and make the decisions for the nation or for the state or for the county or city or whatever it is that is meeting at that particular time. Then what is the foundation of a republic? The foundation of a republic is the rule of law. There is not a single person in the United States who is above the law. This includes the president. If the president violates the law, he or she is just as subject to the consequences of the law as anybody else. Once we start violating the idea of the rule of law and start moving into the rule of man and just saying that the law means the law only applies to this group or the law only applies to this group, instead of having the equal protection of the laws, and also not just the equal protection of the laws, but the equal application of the laws, then we start moving down a road that you don't want to go down, because that leads to chaos. Because what happens when you don't know what the rules are for the game that you're playing? Think about if you're playing golf or golf especially has a very, very specific set of rules, a very lengthy set of rules as well. And what happens when people stop playing by those rules? Well, chaos ensues and everybody gets angry at each other. That's why the rule of law is so important, and we must apply the law evenly. If there's ever a situation where we don't think a law is fair, or we don't think a law is just, then that is when we call on our representatives to then either change that law or to abolish that law. Now, how does a republic differ from a direct democracy? Kind of just went over this. In a republic, we vote for representatives. In a direct democracy, you just vote on whatever the topic is, and everybody gets a vote. So imagine if you had 330 million people in the United States trying to vote on every single issue. It would be absolute chaos. So it's much, much easier to have 435 representatives and 100 senators to do the business of the government, rather than trying to have 330 million trying to do the business of the government. Direct democracies are just not possible on a wide scale. We see direct democracies in much smaller settings like town halls, specifically like back in colonial New England, when a town might only consist of 40 or 50 people, and then they would meet in the town hall and they would literally vote on the business of the government there. Very, very, very rare to see a direct democracy. The United States has a constitutional republic. We are not a democracy. We are a constitutional republic. The reason why I stress this is because in a democracy, everybody votes and majority rules. Majority does not rule in the United States, because we've already been over how you have to have both chambers of Congress and you have to have the presidency if you want to be able to get pretty much anything done. And not only do you have to have all three of those things, but you also have to have a supermajority in the Senate to be able to get by the filibuster. So the United States does not have a democracy. The United States has a republican form. In the U.S., we tend to think of republics as the good form of government. But can republics be bad? And what are their weaknesses? Republics absolutely can be bad. One of the famous lines from the Revolutionary period is somebody who was against going to war against Britain once said that, why would I trade one tyrant 3,000 miles away for 3,000 tyrants 1 mile away? You can have what is called a tyranny of the majority, when the majority violates the rights of the minority. Now, that's the reason, again, why we have rule of law. It's to protect the minority's rights when the majority honestly gains power. So the majority can't just say, we're going to take all of your money or we're going to take all of your stuff. They have to pass laws to be able to do that. And it's going to be very difficult to get those types of laws through, because most people do realize that I'm not always going to be in the majority. So why would I want to stick it to this guy right now when they could end up sticking it to me later on? The major weakness of a republic is that republics are usually very, very slow to act in the face of some sort of crisis or in the face of some sort of problem. You can see the difference in the response between China and the United States in terms of the pandemic. China, being the authoritarian government it is, just shut everything down and told everybody to stay in their apartments or in their homes. And if you don't, then you're going to go to jail. Can't do that in the United States. So our response to the pandemic was less effective, but we also do not want to violate the rights of people in saying that you are not allowed to move. We're not going to restrict that freedom of movement. We're going to try to restrict the freedom of assembly and freedom of association as little as we possibly can to guarantee that those rights are not taken away from the people. Just as with monarchies, you need to know some of the major leaders in republics. So currently the president of the United States is Donald Trump. Again, that will change on January 20th of 2021 when Joe Biden will be sworn in as the new president of the United States. In Mexico, the name of the president is Andrés Manuel Luis Obrador. Please don't make fun of me for my Spanish. I am an American and that is my accent. The president of Brazil is Jair Bolsonaro. Again, please don't make fun of my accent if I mispronounce that. Then in Germany, you have Angela Merkel. In France, Emmanuel Macron. And in Ireland, Michael Martin. In Israel, you have Benjamin Netanyahu, who has been the prime minister of Israel. This is his second time, and he's been the prime minister for, I would say, somewhere around 10 years. So there are several basic tenets to living in a Republican society. Number one is the worth of the individual. Every individual has value. Number two, the equality of all persons. So that goes back to the Equal Protection Clause of the Constitution. Now, this does not mean equal in ability. It does not mean equal in opportunity. It just means equal in the eyes of the law. And it also does not mean equal in outcome. Remember that it means equal in the eyes of the law. So it does not mean that we're going to transfer wealth to one group in order to make sure that they have the same as another group. That's not the type of equality that we're talking about. Majority rule, minority rights, which we've already looked at. The necessity of compromise. So in order to be able to have a functioning government, or in order to be able to have legislation that gets passed, usually we're going to have a divided government. So that means that both sides are going to have to compromise in order to get some of the things that they want, which means that they're also going to have to give up some of the things that they want in order to get things done. We also have the insistence upon individual freedom. So we do not want to go back to a situation where, and so we don't want to go back to a situation where the government abuses its power and oppresses the people. So that's why we tend to hold so strongly to our rights. Now, there are some responsibilities and duties of being a good citizen. Number one is you should vote, but I'm going to put a caveat on this. You should vote only if you know what's going on. So if you don't have any idea who the candidates are, or you don't have any background on the issues, you really shouldn't be voting, because that should be done by people who are engaged and whose vote is going to be done responsibly. You are responsible for your vote. So you have to make sure that your vote is an informed one. You don't necessarily have an obligation to do this, but volunteerism is a good thing. Getting involved in a political campaign could be something that an American does. But really educating yourself and trying to be a good citizen, respecting the rights of others, understanding that even though you have the right to do something doesn't necessarily mean that you should. That's another piece that you definitely want to look at there. Then, how is a free market related to classical liberal forms of government? What aspects of American history or the American character have lent themselves to the success of the American government economy? The United States form of government, the Republican form of government, goes hand in hand with its economic system of capitalism. The idea that we are free, not just in our ability to travel or to speak, but also to gain wealth, to transfer wealth, to go out and acquire property. All of those things are part and parcel of our system. And so capitalism is the idea, capital is just simply money or items that are used in order to produce something. And so capitalism is the acquisition of wealth, or the acquisition of raw materials, or the acquisition of machinery, or the means of production to be able to create something. And what has happened is, because of our what is called the Protestant work ethic, the idea that if you don't work, then you don't eat. The work ethics that is instilled in Americans to go out and work hard and try to make their lives and the lives of their family better, that's all a part of being an American. The next part of this is that we have free enterprise. So the free enterprise system, again, goes right along with capitalism. We are free to buy, sell, and trade as we please, with very, very little government regulation or government intervention. Only when things are going to be dangerous to either the buyer, the seller, or to the society as whole are those transactions either completely stopped or modified in some way through regulations. So a democratic socialist system or a welfare state is going to have high taxes. And what they're going to do is they're going to prioritize basic needs of the people. So housing, food, medical care, all of that is going to be taken care of in some form by the government. Whether the government owns the means of production, which means that it would own the hospitals or it would own the machinery that's used for something, they could go that far. That would be bordering onto socialism. But if you just have a welfare state, that means that taxes are going to be high, and then money is usually redistributed to other groups of people who may need that. So it could be in the form of a SNAP card, which is a food program, or a WIC card, which is the Women and Children food program. You might be given a debit card so you can go out and buy food for your family. Or you might be given access to subsidized medical care. Those are all forms of democratic socialism. Now, where do we usually see this model at? We usually see this model in the Scandinavian countries, in Norway, in Sweden. I don't know much about Iceland, but definitely Denmark. And then you also see a lot of this also in France and more Western Europe than you do in Eastern Europe.